Hey everybody, this is Shane McLaughlin, Platform Architect at Salesforce, and I've got a couple of Lightning components that I'm going to show. So I'm going to open up App Builder, and the first one is a list view or a list of records that's driven from Soql. And so we've been able to make filtered lists for a while just by dragging one of these over here. But then you're limited to whatever list views you can make in Salesforce and the filters that are set up there. Whereas this one is meant to give you a little more granular control. And so if you're a developer or a fairly good admin who understands how to write Soql queries, you just write them right here, and then you say what type of object that you want to query these things out of, and it'll just show whatever field. So whatever the first field you pick is going to be the bold header here. So if I say username, and then if I take one out, it just comes out. And then App Builder will update it as soon as you leave that field. So now they're listed by username and emails. And I could change the object as well. So I could say account, and we could get name, phone, industry from account. And we could also do any sort of filtering that we want to add to that. So if I want to only look at a certain industry, right, so there's my query. I could also add any of my sort bys or limits. For example, now just give me the 5. There, reverse alphabetical order 5 by name. Right. So you get the idea with Soql. You can do whatever you want. And then what I've added here is a behavior option for the administrator to say, what do I want to happen when the user clicks one of these records? And so if I'm going to put this as nothing. And you actually can't click a record in App Builder because it would navigate you somewhere. And so I'm just going to save this, and then I'm going to open this up in Salesforce 1 so you can see what that would look like. We'll come back and do that one in a second. All right, so here's the component, and you can see if I click on it, then nothing's happening. And I'm going to flip back to App Builder real quick, and I'm going to change this behavior to, let's say, navigate to the detail. We'll save it, and then click refresh. All right, so now if I click on one of these, it's going to navigate me to the detail. And I could have easily also done, let's go directly to the chatter feed. If this is more of a mobile picture taking context, let me do a pull to refresh, which is kind of cool. So I'm going to click on it, and I should be on the chatter feed now instead. So I could follow it or add some photos or something. So that's those are the simple navigation behaviors and the nothing. I've got one other behavior option, which is to emit the record that just got clicked as an event. And that won't do anything within this component itself unless it's got some kind of handler. But what it does do really cool is if you have another component, you could have the other component listening for this event and responding to it. And so I made one of that. Let me go ahead and this makes more sense in a tablet or desktop type of view, but on the left-hand side, I can choose a record. And then the right-hand side, I just want to display the page layout that's assigned to this user or that record type for that record that they just selected. And so then what this looks like in Salesforce 1 is, there's my list of records. I click on one, and then I see the record detail screen over on the right. And I could make it pretty and do some styling, but this is just sort of the field view. And then I could click on any of the other ones, and you can see it's kind of changing and displaying whatever I just clicked on. All right, so at this point, that's what the components do. If you keep watching, I'm going to assume that you like code. I'll show you how they're built. All right, I'm going to start with the actual list of record component. And so it does a couple of things. It can be used as standalone, or it can be used in App Builder. So I've implemented the correct interfaces here. It's got those three attributes that we saw: the Soql, the object type, and the, what do you want to do when it gets selected. And each of these are then covered by a design attribute. So if I click over here on design, Soql, and here's where I put my friendly description so that App Builder shows up with our nice help text. So if I click here, these are my descriptions. And then the other thing that's kind of neat is if you want to do this pick list, you specify the field as a string, and then you give it a data source. And so in this case, my comma separated list of strings are driving a pick list. It does one thing when it loads. It calls an init, and that's going to do the two calls. It's going to get our results of our Soql, and it's going to get the describe information. And you see it calling a helper. And if you have really good eyes, you can see over here there is no helper. And the way this is done is by extending another component. And so if I go to the actual component itself, right up at the top, you'll see it extends this thing called or component. And or component is going to have, or component has generic Apex methods that it connects to, and I'll show you this at the end, for pulling down records and doing describes and anything else that you want to do. And that way it becomes super reusable, and you can just say extends or component on anything and have access to all those helper methods without having to put them into each of your components. A little note here: I did have a discussion with one of the project developers for the Lightning and Aura framework, and they have a better way to do this coming, where you kind of create a service and then include it, kind of like you include this type of thing here, which we'll do in a second. But for now, component inheritance through extensions is the only way to get that functionality. Okay, so that's what happens when the thing fires and loads. And then we've got a require here for Lightning Design System that gives us our pretty styling and list dividers and all that kind of stuff. So here, this is getting us Lightning Design System, so everything in here gets styled correctly. Here, the results that come back from that Soql query, we iterate over them. And then inside this gives us our vertical list dividers. And rather than specifying all the fields here on the component, I actually included another component inside this component because, again, this all field display are actually used previously on another project, and it is a subcomponent, specifically for reusability. And so what it's going to do is it's going to take this record and the describe information, and then I'm just going to let it inherit the select behavior, so it knows what to do when a specific row gets clicked off of that list. And then all it does is iterate through the fields and handle handle that click. So I'll flip over to this component next. All right, so this is the all fields displayer. You can see the three things I passed in up here. It has a few things that it needs, and so it registers to fire the event, and that's the event that other component is listening for. It's going to include Lodash, which is great when you're too lazy to write the JavaScript to iterate through lists and look at all their key value pairs. And then I had to write something called parallel check, because this thing actually needs a couple things that may not come back at the same time. It needs, actually there's three things. So it needs the record details, it needs the object described information so it can get the friendly field names, and it needs Lodash to be loaded. And so if I look at its controller, it's got this parallel check that really is just checking that all these three things are defined, that I've got data for all of them. And then once that happens, it will do this. And then the component itself has got listeners to say, okay, after Lodash, check it, and that way I don't know which order these are going to come back in, and I kind of don't care as long as the third time one of them happens, the other two are already done, then I can keep going with my work. And then the other thing it's going to have is what happens when that record gets clicked. And this is where we're looking at that select behavior that kind of has been passed in through that dropdown. And so we could say, well, if nothing just quit and give up. And then if it's an event, we're going to pass the record ID and the entire record. And then here's all those different navigation scenarios. And so this is a standard navigation in Lightning components. So navigate to S objects, and then you can specify, the detail slide or the chatter slide or the related slide. And so that handles kind of all of our collect scenarios in a nice little encapsulated way. And then the helper here is just to build those key value pairs. And so what it's going to do is go through all the fields on the record that it got, and then it's going to use Lodash to look into the describe information. And if the field is called location __C, it's going to get the label for that. And then if it, I have some stuff I haven't implemented yet. One of the things that's kind of ugly is dates. They're not formatted nicely. They're just raw JavaScript dates. And but I want to describe it as the person's locale. So what I'm going to do here is, if it's a date or a date time, then let's reformat them to make it pretty. And then it just pushes them all to the array that gets iterated on the page. And then there on the page, the whatever the first value is from that list that came out of the Soql, we put that as the header, and then everything else is in this smaller font, and we just go through each one of them and field name, field value, field name, field value until we get to the end. And so you can see, item 0 in the list is here, and then this iteration actually starts with item 1. So that's how I'm doing the pre-formatting. There is an event here. So if you selected event as your behavior, it will register to send that event, and then when it gets fired on the onClick method, here's what that event looks like. It just contains the ID and the record. So that's pretty simple. The last component is the dynamic record view, and I can click to that one. It's pretty simple. It listens for the event, and there's here's what I do if I hear that event, and then all it has is a body, and I'll show you the code for that. There actually is a standard component that just displays all the fields for, based on the page layout and follows all the permissions and, profiles and all that kind of stuff. But the force record view component doesn't have a way to respond to changes. And the change here is, I want to change from one record view to another. It gets its value when the page loads, and there's no way to have it re-render or dynamically change its event. It doesn't have a way to listen for that. So that's why it's wrapped in this dynamic record view component. And so this is kind of cool. I've never done this before, but this is how you dynamically create components and from the JavaScript. So I'm going to say create component. Here's the name of the component I want. It could be a component I made, or it could be a standard component that Salesforce created. And then here's its parameters. So I want to set its ID. And then I want to give it the record ID. So it's listening for that event, and that event contains the record that the user clicked on. So here, that's how it gets put into the record view. And then this third thing is just a callback for what happens after it gets created. And so this is it's created, but it's not actually on the page yet. And so it gets created, and then we say component.set vbody, and then we pass in this force record view component that just got created. And that's why so vbody is built into all the components, but I put it on here so that this is where it is. If you wanted to have some markup around here and some other things around here, vbody is going to be the part that gets replaced with your record view. So there's all that. And then the very last thing is the actual Aura component itself. And I built this because I'm used to working with ngForce, and so I just ripped off all of its code and to grab a couple of its methods. So what ngForce has is a way to do a query, and you just pass it some Soql, and it throws a database query, and then puts all the records in a map that came back, and then sends them down. So it's kind of like query anything from JavaScript, or here's the describe for anything, and it's got all the CRUD methods and stuff. I haven't implemented all of them yet. But basically, this already existed, and the only thing I was doing is adding Aura enabled to them instead of just being remote action for Visual Force remoting. And then the controller for that, there's not actually a controller. There's only a helper. And the reason is the controllers wouldn't be accessible by the extensions of that. But here's how that helper is set up. So if I say query, I'm going to pass it the component. I'm going to pass it my Soql query, and I'm going to pass it the return value. And then it does all the action stuff for me and gets it from Apex and handles the callback and says, okay, whatever comes back, I want to save it on wherever you told me to put it. If we go back to our raw Soql controller, you can see it's going to call helper, which, because it's an extension of Aura component, it's actually the helper on Aura component. And there's that query method on Aura component. And then I pass it the component. I pass it some Soql, which in this case I'm getting off the component, but you could hard code it there if you're doing something simple and just want to pass in some Soql with Aura. And then I say save it on results, and that's a place on my local component. And that gives me the ability to only write 2 lines of code here and actually make 2 separate transactions with Apex, and with fully reusable stuff here, and calling these helpers. So that's a pretty cool functionality if you find yourself writing the same code over and over again, which is definitely something I feel happening within the Lightning framework.